Daredevil might be one of the most established and popular heroes that Marvel has created, but that doesn't mean that DD gets a cushy life and a nice happy ending. In fact, even years after his first appearance, it seems to be just the opposite. Welcome back, Nerd Squad. I'm your host, Amanda McKnight. Today we'll be counting down the top 10 worst things that happened to Daredevil. Let's get into it. Number 10. Abandoned by Stick. Really, Matt's story, as you're going to find out, is all about loss, tragedy, and grief. While there's a lot of ups for Matt Murdock, there's also been a lot of downs. One such high he rode was being trained by his master Stick, who began training him after the accident where he lost his sight, but had all other senses heightened as a result. However, shortly after his father's death, Stick too would leave Matt, and at a time when Matt really needed him too. Matt had tracked down the last man involved in his father's death. A masked Matt attacked him, but found himself overwhelmed by the women who worked there, who seemed to take out all their worldly rage on him, attacking him in kind. In the scuffle, he accidentally pushed one of them with enough force to send her crashing and falling out of a window. She would live, but the incident would awaken other personas living deep within her. This woman would become Daredevil's villain and sometimes love interest, Typhoid Mary. Matt at the time, however, believed he'd killed the woman and ran back to the gym in search of Stick. But Stick was gone. He had abandoned Matt because of what he'd done. Ouch. Sucks. Number 9. Getting involved with Typhoid Mary. Typhoid Mary wasn't just a person that Daredevil hurt, she'd also become a recurring love interest of his, on and off. And honestly, the moment where he accidentally pushed her out of a window could be considered one of the worst moments of his life, for how much grief Typhoid Mary would cause in his life both as an enemy and as a lover. Typhoid Mary suffers from a dissociative personality disorder, meaning she has personalities that reside within her that are more calm or sweet, but then there are of course also sides to her that are more violent or deadly, and each one is literally their own personality, separate from the other. Typically, the persona of Mary is her sweeter side, Typhoid Mary is her more villainous one, and Bloody Mary is probably the most violent, hate-filled, and unhinged personality of hers. However, it should be noted that while Typhoid Mary is one of the worst people to get involved with Matt, he was also likely one of the worst things in her adult life, at least, to have happened to her, with him re-triggering her split personalities to resurface. Although it wasn't him initially that caused the split, at least. That was trauma from her past. Some really intense trauma, to be real about that. And friends, before I move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more Daredevil lists, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. His mother's fate. Not the fact that she became a nun, but more what caused her to leave her family. Later on, we would learn that Matt's mom, Maggie, had abandoned her children due to experiencing severe depression following their birth. As a result of her depression, she also became obsessed with Matt's safety and paranoid that her husband was plotting against her. One night, she became so distraught and confused by her depression that she tried to do harm to young Matt. Jack stopped her, but Maggie was overwhelmed with fear. Terrified, she felt the best course of action was to leave her family so she couldn't do any harm to any of them. She left, became a nun, and even after she recovered from her mental illness, did not return, leaving Matt to grow up without his mother, led to believe by his father that his mother had died when he was very young. Matt would not learn until much later in his life what had really happened to her. Number 7. The death of his father. Let's go back to Daredevil's origins. Right off the bat, life was pretty tough for Matt, starting out as a hero. His dad was Jack Murdock, who was a boxer, and always had dreamed of a better life for his son. And while Matt would go on to have a pretty good life, becoming a lawyer, Jack wouldn't be around to see it. Jack Murdock was killed after he refused to take a dive in a rigged boxing match. The fixer, Roscoe Sweeney, had been the one to order the hit, as he was the boxing organizer who worked with Jack and had ordered him to throw that match. Daredevil would pursue the fixer, attempting to get revenge for his father's death, but Sweeney would die of a heart attack during the chase. Number 6. Secret identity exposed. One of the worst things to have happened to Matt, multiple times really at this point, is having his identity revealed. There are a few instances where this happened prior to Kingpin even learning of his identity through information that Matt's ex at the time, Karen Page, sold him, but I would still say that the reveal to Kingpin was still probably one of the worst. Also, to be clear, Karen Page I don't think explicitly sold that information to Kingpin. She sold the information and then it ended up in Kingpin's hands. Kingpin used the information that he got to make Matt's life a living hell, ruining his civilian life, leaving Matt destitute, with even his reputation as Daredevil and even his costume left in shambles. It really was a rough time just all around. Number 5. Depression. While the revelation of his mother's fate and the death of his father was hard, something else that Matt would inherit would also prove challenging for most of his life. That was Matt's own depression. Like his mother before him, Matt has also struggled with his own emotions and mental health throughout much of his life. We later learn that the struggle of depression is also seemingly Matt's every day. Depression isn't something that he can really escape, but the silver lining is, although he's felt the weight of it, he's also learned how to cope with it. Not necessarily recovering from it fully, but definitely finding a way to live life with his depression and at times kind of move through it, refusing to let it overwhelm him, even at times when, based on what was going on, this likely seemed or felt impossible for him. As a result, Daredevil as a hero likely possesses some of the strongest willpower throughout Marvel's characters. I think it goes like Doom and then Daredevil, with maybe 1 or 2 people in between them. I feel like if you're depressed every day and you're constantly struggling and being a superhero and dealing with all of the other, stuff in life, that's pretty impressive. You gotta have a strong will. Number 4. Shadowland. The Shadowland story was really brutal for Matt Murdock and also for readers and fans. DD ended up becoming the leader of the Hand, but it would later be revealed that he was actually not in control of himself during this time, as he was possessed by the Beast of the Hand, a demonic entity. Daredevil did a lot of awful things during this time, including killing Bullseye, building a mighty fortress known as Shadowland, and attempting to kill BFF Foggy. No, not Foggy. All in all, the whole event was a rough go for Daredevil, and by the end of it, he was forced to leave Hell's Kitchen and go on a journey of self-discovery as he tried to find his way back to his initially heroic path. Shadowland was rough overall. It's a rough time in Daredevil's story. Number 3. Marriage to Milla Donovan. So all in all, although Daredevil considered it in retrospect to be a mistake, I'm not trying to say that their whole marriage was awful, because that's not what happened. Matt and Milla had some good moments, and there was a time that they were both happy together, but ultimately their marriage ended up causing them both a lot of pain in the end overall. At one point, Milla herself didn't even believe that their marriage was ever real, convinced that Matt had manipulated and lied to her. She filed for an annulment, and it hurt Matt to receive the request and even have to consider that. However, Matt and Milla would make it past this and eventually end up back together, seemingly happy for a time. But her worry over Matt's safety would cause her to seek out the help of a therapist, who was secretly Mr. Fear in disguise. Oh goodness. Instead of helping Milla, Mr. Fear actually only made things worse for her, causing her to become more fearful and paranoid. Eventually, Milla did enough harm that she was arrested and considered criminally insane after she accidentally pushed someone into the path of a speeding train. Don't think Milla has ever recovered from all of that terrible stuff that happened to her. Alas. I mean, at least she's still alive, I guess? As we move on to the next points. Number 2. Death of Elektra. While she may have been returned to life later on, the death of Elektra, Matt's first love, still hit him hard. The two hadn't been together for some time, but had dated back in college before Elektra mysteriously disappeared. She resurfaced years later and was revealed to be an assassin, competing to become the Kingpin's #1 hitman. Or hit woman, perhaps. Unfortunately, she was up against Bullseye, who decided to kill off his competition. He and Elektra had a dramatic fight that ended with an iconic panel showing her being stabbed through with her own sai by Bullseye, but only after he had already seemingly cut her throat by throwing a playing card at her, so don't forget that part. While Elektra and Daredevil weren't together at the time of her death, her fate at the hands of Bullseye still haunted Matt, and he probably still thinks back to that moment and is like, even though Elektra is alive now. Number 1. Death of Karen Page. Yeah, Daredevil loses a lot of people that he cares about. Honestly, it's no wonder he struggles with depression, considering just how much loss he suffered in his life. I mean, that's gotta be really hard. Karen Page was another close person who became a victim and a target as a result of being so close to Matt, aka Daredevil. For many years, she was Daredevil's confidant, his on and off again girlfriend who knew of his secret identity. In fact, I believe Karen Page was one of the first people, don't quote me on this, but I think she was one of the first people to actually find out about Matt's secret identity as Daredevil, so yeah. Eventually, her closeness to Matt put her on a very dangerous collision course with one of his arch nemeses, Bullseye. As Bullseye, who pretty much never misses, targeted Daredevil with his own billy club, Karen jumped in front of the projectile to save Matt, and in so doing was killed as the billy club penetrated her heart. What do you think are some of the worst things to have happened to Matt in the comics? How about in the live action series? Was the Netflix series ending and us losing Charlie Cox one of the worst things to happen to DD for you? Does it also strike you as weird that back in the original comic book series, he is always constantly reminded that he's blind? Or is that just me? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This has been Top 10 Nerd, and I'm your host Amanda McKnight, reminding you till next time to stay nerdy, YouTube.